8. Snozzcumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelching tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-flunking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky poo vegetable. It is called the snozzcumber. The snozzcumber? Cried Sophie. There's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today we is not believing in snozzcumbers? Just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our own 2 little winkles, we think it's not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. And the humpelcrimp. What's that? Sophie said. And the rap rascal? The what? Sophie said. And the crumbscottle? Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not a very well-know-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is an absolute know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool, Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is 2 different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a snozzcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long, again, as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its girth as a perambulator. It was black with white strips along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse novels. Here is a repulsant snozzcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squabble it, I despise it, I desponge it, but because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky poo snozzcumbers instead. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones? Sophie said. I know it is bones, the BFG said, but please understand that I cannot be helping if I sometimes is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother? Cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you was knowing that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Who ever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving the snozzcumber around his head like a lasso. There never was a woman giant, and there will never be one. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled. In that case, she said, how were you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way as the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. Now how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old. Very, very old and crumply. Perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing and nobody is ever knowing where he goes to. But mostly as giants is simply going on and on like whiffsy time twiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome snozzcumber in his right hand, and now he pulled one end into his mouth and bit off a huge hunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like crunching of lumps of ice. It's filthing, he spluttered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozzcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgusterous, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable, it's rotsome, it's maggot-wise. Try yourself. this foulsome snoscumber. No, thank you, Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snipsy little winkle. Have a go. Sophie took a small nibble. Ugh! She spluttered. Oh, no! Oh, gosh! Oh, help! She spat it out quickly. It tastes of frog skins, she gasped, and rotten fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. To me it is tasting of clock coaches and slime wanglers. Do we really have to eat it? Sophie said. You do unless you is wanting to become so thin you will be disappearing into a thick ear. Into thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different. Once again, that sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. Words, he said, is such a tickling problem to me all my life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or other, they is always getting squiddled around. That happens to everyone, Sophie said. Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I am speaking the most terrible Wiglish. I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said. You do? Cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. You really do? Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you was not twiddling my leg? Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk. How wondercrump, cried the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie spunklers. How absolutely squiffling. I is a lot of a stutter. Listen, Sophie said. We don't have to eat snoscumbers. In the fields around our village, there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflower and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting? The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. I is a very honorable giant, he said. I would rather be chewing up some rotten snoscumbers than snitching things from other people. You stole me, Sophie said. I did not steal you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you is only a tiny little girl. Chapter 9. The Blood Bottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, Runt! Is you there, Runt? I hear you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt? Look out! Cried the BFG. It's the Blood Bottler! But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside and a 50-foot giant more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous partly eaten snoscumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. Who was you jabbling to in here just now? He boomed. I was jabbling to myself, the BFG answered. Pilful fizz, shouted the Blood Bottler. Book swallop, he boomed. You was talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking. No, cried the BFG. Yes, boomed the Blood Bottler. I is guessing you has snitched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper. The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one in here, he stammered. Why don't you leave me alone? The Blood Bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. Runty little scumscrewer, he shouted. Piffling little swishfigler. Squimpy little bottlewort. Prunty little pogswizzler. I is now going to search the primroses. He grabbed the BFG by the arm. And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being, he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he had got the chance and hide her behind his back. But now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snoscumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The blood blottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was a black hair spouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy-looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and flat, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face almost ear to ear, and had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying on the top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The blood bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your piddling bottles!" he shouted. "What are you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "He was only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you as dotty as a dog's waggler," cried the blood bottler. Soon the blood bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snozzcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, it was not going to hide her if the blood bottler had picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff, taking care to stay out of sight. Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozzcumber, large enough for her to crouch in so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, but what did matter was that if it was going to save her from being eaten. The blood bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten snozzcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. "Sophie, where is you?" he thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be jumbling off that high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie?" "So this is the filthy, rotten glubbage you was eating," boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partly eaten snozzcumber. "You must be cockles to be guzzling such rapsquash." For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. "This is the scrum-diddly-yumptious snozzcumber," he said. "I's guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a snozzcumber, blood bottler?" "Human beings is juicier," the blood bottler said. "You was talking rumyot," the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him billowing out of the cave. "I is happy to let you sample it," the BFG went on. "But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitcher for my supper." The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. "You is not switch fiddling with me, is you?" said the blood bottler. "Never!" cried the BFG passionately. "Take a bite, and I am positive you'll be shouting out, 'Oh, how scrum-diddly-yumptious this wonder veg is!'" The BFG could see the greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. "Vegetables is very good for you," he went on. "It is not healthsome always to be eating meaty things." "Just this once," the blood bottler said, "I is going to taste these rotsome eats of yours. But I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head." He picked up the snozzcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, "Don't!" but that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly, there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together, a few inches from her head. There was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She got a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. "Eeyouch!" roared the blood bottler. "Ugh, blatch, leech!" And then he spat. All of the great lumps of the snoscumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she had the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. "You little swine bugler!" roared the blood bottler. "You little pig zwiller!" He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snoscumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. "You was not loving it?" the BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. "Loving it?" yelled the blood bottler. "This is the most disgustorous taste that is ever touching my teeth. You must be buggies to be swallowing sludge like that every night. You could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beans." "Eating human beings is wrong and evil," the BFG said. "It is guzzling and glumptious," shouted the blood bottler. "And tonight I's galloping off to Chile to swabble a few human Chile beans. Is you wishing to know why I choosing Chile?" "I's not wishing to know anything," the BFG said, very dignified. "I is choosing Chile," the blood bottler said, "because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important. I has plenty of cold eats in this scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a Chile human being. Human beings from Chile is very chilly." "Horrible," the BFG said. "You ought to be ashamed." "Other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop up to England tonight to guzzle school chidlers," the blood bottler said. "I is very fond indeed of English school chidlers. They has a nice inky, booky flavor. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them." "You is disgusting," the BFG said. "And you is an insult to the giant peoples," shouted the blood bottler. "You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a pibbling little pitsqueak. You is a cream puffnut." With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. "Sophie!" he whispered. "Sophie, where is you? Sophie?" Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. "I'm here," she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. "Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump," he said. "I was in his mouth," Sophie said. "You was what?" cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened. "And there I was telling him to eat the filthsome snoscumber, and you was all the time inside it?" the BFG cried. "Not much fun," Sophie said. "Just look at you, you poor little chidler," cried the BFG. "You was all covered in snoscumber and giant spit." He set about cleaning her up as best as he could. "I is hating those other giants more than ever now," he said. "You know what I should like?" "What?" Sophie said. "I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one." "I'd be glad to help you," Sophie said. "Let me see if I can think up a way of doing it."